For 30 years, the yellow number 2 pencil on Johnny Carson's desk symbolized his absolute control, but one producer's message turned it into a weapon against himself. We revealed the 3 unforgivable words that made the king of late night shatter his own most valuable tool on camera. The most important tool on the desk of Johnny Carson was not the microphone, the guest list, or the glass of water. It was the pencil, a simple yellow number 2, always perfectly sharpened, a quiet symbol of his legendary control. On this specific Monday night in late 1983, a night threatening his 30-year legacy, Johnny picked up that pencil. Instead of the familiar, comforting weight of precision, he felt the first tremor of a coming earthquake. Studio One in Burbank, California always hummed with nervous energy. Tonight, the buzz felt heavier. Johnny entered the studio early, bypassing his typical banter with Ed McMahon and Doc Severinsen. He went straight to his desk, meticulously straightening papers, and focused on the ritual, sharpening the pencil. He used a small, silent electric sharpener, watching the point grow needle-sharp, a process that usually calmed the champion of late night. Tonight, the calm wouldn't take hold. His jaw was set tight, the customary light in his eyes conspicuously dimmed. He was focused, not for comedy. He was focused like a general, staring at an impossible map. The audience filled the seats, oblivious that the man who made them laugh was fighting a private, internal battle. The Tonight Show was supposed to be his sanctuary, the place where all outside pressures, his tangled personal life, the relentless demands of a television empire, melted beneath the spotlight. Tonight, those pressures followed him onto the stage. The joke writers had struggled. The stack of index cards was thin, the lines forced, reaching for elusive laughter. During the opening announcements, Johnny tapped the pencil against the mahogany desk. 3, 4, 5 times. A rapid, insistent rhythm out of sync with Ed McMahon's booming pronouncements. The crew exchanged looks. Johnny Carson never showed impatience. He was the epitome of unflappable poise. This percussive action was a clear red flag. The monologue began. For the first few minutes, it was Johnny being Johnny. The smile, the timing, the signature tilt, all immaculate. But the audience reacted slowly. A joke that should have roared garnered polite chuckles. Johnny pressed harder, leaning into the next punchline. Then, the first technical imperfection. The teleprompter, usually flawless, flickered for a split second. Imperceptible to the millions watching, Johnny saw it. He skipped a line entirely, covering the jump, with a slightly too loud laugh that felt strained, metallic. He reached for the pencil, intending to scratch out a failed joke, but his hand froze, hovering. He was losing control of the show, a loss manifesting in every small twitching muscle. He kept fighting, but beneath the jokes, a deep, corrosive anger simmered. He felt the frustration building, a cold, hard knot tightening in his chest, a knot desperately needing to be undone. He just didn't know the true source of his devastation was about to walk on stage. What the audience didn't know as Johnny finished his monologue and settled into his chair was that he was battling not just slipping confidence, he was battling a ghost, a shadow named Jack Riley, whose youthful exuberance and crass appeal were threatening the throne of late night. The king was facing his mortality, and the sight of it was tearing him apart behind the famous smile. This rival, a fictional figure we call Jack Riley, was everything Johnny was not. Loud, unpolished, aimed directly at the restless younger generation who thought Carson was their parents' old ritual. Jack Riley's show, airing simultaneously, was gaining traction not just with viewers under 30, but with network executives who saw dollar signs in fast food advertisements and rock and roll segments. Just last week, Riley featured a stunt involving a soaking tank and a dozen gerbils, a crass, chaotic gimmick that delivered a huge spike in market share. Tension was palpable in the halls of NBC. Quiet fear replaced customary confidence, and Johnny, despite attempts to dismiss the ordeal, absorbed every anxious glance and whispered rating report. He was professional to the bone, but this challenge felt deeply personal, an attack on his legacy, his brilliance. He could handle the technical flaws and audience jitters, but not be deemed obsolete. During the first commercial break, when the camera lights cooled and makeup artists swarmed, Johnny sat perfectly still, refusing a touch-up. Ed McMahon, always his closest confidant, tried to break the ice. "Tough crowd tonight, eh, Chief? Think they skipped their afternoon nap?" Ed's voice was light. Johnny didn't look up from the pencil he was now twisting in his hands. "It's not the crowd, Ed," Johnny murmured, low and tight. "It's the noise. Too much noise from the outside, leaking in." Ed knew what the noise meant. The network was inserting thinly veiled comments into memos, asking if the monologue could be a little more contemporary, if the guests could be a little less established. The quiet implication was clear. Jack Riley was pulling the rug out from under them. "Johnny, listen to me," Ed said, leaning closer, his boisterousness replaced by rare seriousness. "The Tonight Show is a tradition. It is home. Nobody wants cheap tricks. They want you." Johnny finally looked at Ed, his blue eyes tired. "They want the idea of me, Ed. They want comfort. But the minute that comfort stops translating into numbers for the suits, the idea changes. I just wish they'd have the decency to let me depart on my own terms." He stood up abruptly, signaling the conversation was over. He walked a few paces, stopped, and adjusted his tie in the reflective black glass of a stage monitor. He was the picture of control again, yet the moment was telling. He hadn't argued back, hadn't mocked the rival. He simply exposed a deep vulnerability, a profound, quiet dread that he might be forced to leave the desk he considered his only true home. As the theme music swelled, Johnny settled back into his seat, the internal war raging beneath his perfect tuxedo. He was about to introduce his first guest, but his mind was miles away, calculating market shares, counting the cost of fame. He was so distracted by the unseen pressure, so consumed by the fear of replacement, that he was utterly unprepared for the small, fragile disaster waiting just off stage. This was the night the king's distraction would allow fate to play its cruelest trick. If the monologue was the first tremor, the arrival of the first guest was the definitive crack in the foundation. Johnny Carson, the master interviewer, was now trapped in a scenario where he was expected to perform triage on a crumbling soul, a task that intensified the white-hot rage building inside him. The guest was a young actress, we call her Sarah, fresh off a major cinematic success, but painfully unsuited for the raw demands of live talk radio. She was introduced with Ed McMahon's fanfare, yet the moment she sat down, the air went out of the room. She was visibly shaking. Her eyes darted around the audience, wide and terrified, avoiding Johnny's steady gaze. Johnny, sensing the fragility, leaned in, lowered his voice, and gave her a softball question about her film role, trying to ease her into the conversation. She responded with a single, breathy word: "Yes." The ensuing 6 minutes were an escalating catastrophe for Johnny's professional psyche. He threw out 3 conversational lifelines. He asked about her co-stars. "They were great," she whispered. He asked about the difficulty of the stunts. "It was hard," she managed. He even offered a goofy, self-deprecating joke to try and coax a natural response. But Sarah was frozen, her terror palpable, infecting the entire studio with excruciating awkwardness. The audience, sensing the disaster, stopped chuckling, settling into a miserable, pitying silence, louder than any laughter. This was the one thing Johnny could not abide: wasted air. To Johnny, this was not just a poor interview. It was a visible failure of his own meticulous craft, a glaring reminder that even his legendary skill couldn't salvage a segment when the other party refused to participate. The pressure from the rival host, the network's anxiety, and the earlier technical glitches all coalesced into frustration, aimed squarely at this terrified young woman. He was trying to be kind and professional, but every failed attempt to rescue the segment made his patience dwindle. He tried one last, desperate attempt, asking her about her hometown. Sarah simply burst into tears, silent, overwhelming sobs she tried desperately to hide. The audience's deep, miserable silence, a physical weight in the room, amplified his internal rage at the lack of control. The producers off camera were frantic, silently signaling Johnny to go to commercial, but he held firm, refusing to leave the poor woman weeping on his couch. He looked at the camera, then back at Sarah, and his own forced professional calm cracked, revealing deep, weary exasperation. He looked over at Ed McMahon, who offered a sympathetic shrug of helplessness. That shrug was the final straw. Johnny had spent 2 hours battling forces he couldn't control, the ratings, the teleprompter, the nervous actress. His meticulous plan had been decimated. Now, the final minutes before the break were filled with a woman crying on national television, highlighting his total lack of control. This confluence of public failure and private rage created the perfect vacuum for the devastating news about to arrive. If you've ever felt the pressure of a failure that wasn't your fault, hit that subscribe button now. We dive deep into the unseen, emotional battles of Hollywood's biggest legends, showing the private struggle behind the public smile. The moment Johnny announced the commercial break, the stage lights dimmed, but the tension in the studio flashed blindingly bright. Johnny stared down at his desk, his hand gripping the yellow number 2 pencil, that symbol of his professional control. So fiercely, the knuckles were bloodless white, the fragile wood straining against his suppressed rage. He ignored the production assistants scrambling for the actress, ignoring the frantic crew whispers trying to salvage the set. For a few agonizing seconds, he remained absolutely motionless, a monument of frustrated perfection. He took deep, invisible breaths, trying to reconstruct the shattered facade of the king of late night. He dabbed a napkin to his temples, wiping away the sweat of exhaustion, mentally preparing to return to the fray. At this precise moment of forced composure, the second, far more dangerous problem emerged from the shadows. A figure appeared at the edge of the stage, near the curtain. David, a young producer. David was not the executive producer, Fred Dordova, who would have had the courtesy and rank to deliver sensitive news. David was junior, inexperienced, clearly terrified of his errand. His presence alone was a massive sign of disrespect, a clear signal from the network suits that they no longer felt the need to treat Johnny with deference. Johnny saw David immediately. He didn't need words. He recognized the look of cold dread on the young man's face, the face of someone carrying news that could break an empire. David approached hesitantly, weaving through cables and set dressings. He stopped beside Johnny's desk and leaned in, his voice dropping to a nervous whisper, even though the audience couldn't hear him. "Mr. Carson," he started, his voice cracking slightly. I have to tell you something. The network just patched it through." Johnny lifted his head slowly. The anger was still there, a hot ember beneath the ice, now mixed with weary curiosity. He didn't speak. He simply fixed David with that legendary penetrating stare that could make seasoned comics forget their best jokes. David's pale, apologetic eyes shifted continuously, focusing only on the knot of Johnny's tie, demonstrating his complete lack of authority and fear of looking the king in the eye. The air around them thickened, condensing all the night's failures and outside pressures into one unbearable moment. Johnny's expression said, "I have endured a disastrous monologue, a rival's threat, and a weeping guest. What else could possibly be left?" David's pale, apologetic eyes shifted toward the mahogany desk, avoiding the blue fire of Carson's gaze. The clock on the wall counted down the final seconds. Johnny waited, silent, letting the junior producer feel the full, isolating weight of the moment. He knew instinctively that whatever David was about to say was the reason the pencil was the only steady thing in his trembling grasp. This was not a correction or a technical note. This was a sentence of devastation. The countdown hit 5 seconds, and David knew he had no more time to soften the blow. He took a single desperate breath, and the 3 sentences that would shatter Johnny's composure forever were released into the strained silence. The air was so thick with unspoken dread that the sound of the stage manager's silent, sweeping hand counting down the final 5 seconds seemed deafening. Then the producer, David, leaned forward, his voice a barely audible hiss of regret, and delivered the 3 sentences that were not just news, but a calculated personal wound aimed directly at the heart of Johnny Carson. We lost the entire West Coast feed due to a main circuit failure. Sentence 1, a catastrophic technical failure. Millions of viewers, the core of his audience, were staring at a test pattern. This was an insult added to the injury of the disastrous interview. David continued, his voice trembling even more violently. The rival show's rating just hit 30 shares in New York. Sentence 2, the direct, brutal confirmation that his competitor, the noise he had tried to dismiss, had not only caught up but was stealing his crucial Eastern market, and on a night he was publicly stumbling. This was the professional affront. Johnny's face remained impassive, betraying nothing, but his grip on the pencil tightened further, a desperate, final attempt to exert control over the only object he could still physically command. His fingers flexed, the wood creaking softly, the internal pressure building like steam in a sealed pipe. And then came the third, unforgivable sentence, the one that proved the network saw him not as a legend, but as a commodity losing value. Your contract bonus has been renegotiated down by 20%, effective immediately. It was the ultimate betrayal. After decades of loyalty and unrivaled cultural influence, they chose the moment of his greatest weakness to deliver a financial and spiritual blow. He realized the depth of the cold contempt. The network didn't value him. They merely leased him. It wasn't the money. It was the utter lack of respect, the transactional coldness that confirmed their faith was gone. The three sentences, catastrophe, competition, and cold-hearted betrayal, struck him simultaneously. In that instant, every ounce of his legendary composure, the cool mask he wore for 30 years, shattered. He didn't shout. He didn't stand up. He didn't drop the pencil. Instead, he twisted his wrist, slowly, deliberately, driving the wood against the unyielding strength of his own tightened fist. The yellow number 2 pencil, perfectly sharpened, ready for the next joke, made a surprisingly small, dry, sharp snap, instantly swallowed by the studio noise, yet deafening to every crew member nearby. The pencil broke completely in the middle, the graphite dust and splintered wood falling onto the mahogany desk. It was an act of pure, silent, incandescent fury, a rage turned inward toward the only thing he felt safe destroying, his own tool. The junior producer gasped, recognizing the violence. Ed McMahon, watching, looked stunned. For the first time, Johnny Carson lost the battle for inner control, letting the outside world penetrate his private fortress. As the stage manager swept his hand forward, 2 seconds, 1 second, on air, Johnny lifted his head, raw anger burning in his eyes, knowing he had to face 20 million people with a broken weapon in his hand and a broken spirit in his chest. The immediate, devastating reality was the small pile of debris on the perfect mahogany surface, the splintered yellow wood, the fine dark dust of graphite, the shattered symbol of the legendary Carson Cool. Johnny knew the crew had seen the private, furious implosion, but there was no time for processing, no time for shame. The red light was on. The junior producer, David, melted back into the shadows. Ed McMahon, though visibly shaken, was the ultimate professional. He caught Johnny's eye, offering a subtle, supportive nod. But Johnny didn't return the gesture. He pivoted instantly, forcing the cold, rigid mask back into place. The smile he offered the camera was not genuine. It was the fake smile, a technical maneuver designed only to deflect and mislead. The transition back to the interview segment was brutal. The interview with the now composed but still fragile actress was scheduled to continue, but Johnny simply could not bring himself to engage. He cut off Ed McMahon's brief, friendly interjection with hostile abruptness, a reaction Ed hadn't seen in decades. Instead of steering the conversation back to the actress, he grabbed the closest index card, one containing a secondary joke, and delivered it with unnecessary bitterness. The joke, meant to be light-hearted commentary on Washington politics, landed not with a laugh, but a palpable wave of confused silence. He covered the failed joke immediately, not with a pivot to the guest, but with a scathing, almost cruel ad-lib about the quality of the material he was being given. It was an internal venting, a jab at his writers, and the network suits that were barely veiled. The crew members, who understood the pressure, looked away, embarrassed for their hero. They knew the rage was real because he was violating the first rule of Carson: never expose the machinery. For the next 10 minutes, Johnny went through the motions with mechanical efficiency. He was flawless technically, conducting a rapid-fire succession of introductions and short interviews, but there was no life, no generosity. His eyes, the windows to his soul, were flat. He kept his right hand anchored firmly on the desk, concealing the remaining fragments of the broken pencil. Every movement was sharp, every word precise, driven by a raw, cold determination to simply finish the night. He was not performing for the audience. He was performing for himself, proving to the invisible network executives that even wounded, he was still formidable. The professional survived, but the compassionate human being, the man who used his humor to heal, vanished, leaving a cold, efficient host trapped in a cage of anger. He finally sent the show to its next break, knowing the real battle, the private reckoning, was still waiting in his solitude. Have you ever had to put on a fake smile or maintain your composure when you were secretly dealing with a crushing difficulty? Share your story in the comments below. Let us remember the strength it takes to face the world when your spirit is broken. The final applause of the night was a thunderous roar. For Johnny Carson, it sounded like a door slamming shut. He rose, gave a quick, tense wave, and instead of engaging in the usual post-show chatter, he walked straight off the set, disappearing into the quiet, protected space of his dressing room, the door clicking shut with definitive finality. The dressing room was always a haven, but tonight it felt like a cage. He stood there for a long moment, the sudden silence after the broadcast echoing in his ears. He began to meticulously clean his desk, the one still out on the stage, where the broken pencil lay. He instructed a bewildered stagehand, a young man named Michael, to bring him the fragments. Michael returned moments later, holding a small paper napkin containing the shattered pieces. Johnny took the napkin, dismissed the stagehand with a curt nod, closing the door again. He then sat down at his private makeup table, not to remove the layers of television foundation, but to stare at the napkin. Slowly, painstakingly, he emptied the fragments onto the table. He traced the jagged edges of the broken wood, the small, sharp point of the graphite, focusing all his furious, misdirected energy onto these tiny, insignificant pieces. It was a moment of profound, quiet self-punishment. This destruction, this loss of control, was his alone. The anger at the network, the rival, and the failed segment had all boiled down to the snapping point of that one pencil. A knock came at the door. His agent, Arthur. Johnny hesitated, then called him in. Arthur entered, apologetic and tense, trying to explain the network's decision about the bonus, attempting to frame the affront as a misunderstanding. "Johnny, they didn't mean it as a slight, it's just..." Arthur trailed off, seeing the intense, frightening stillness in his client's eyes. Johnny didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. He let Arthur finish his stammering explanation, then spoke, his voice dangerously low, stripped of all humor. "Arthur," he said, using his agent's name like a verdict, "you are paid to ensure my focus remains here." He tapped the table sharply. "On the work, in the audience. When I have to worry about my contract, my legacy, or junior producers delivering corporate betrayals, you have failed." He didn't scream. He simply stated the undeniable truth. His silence afterward was devastating, an invisible wall of disappointment that froze the air. Arthur knew the conversation was over, the consequences immense. Johnny had chosen isolation, transforming incandescent anger into cold, cutting power. He had retreated into his most dangerous persona, the man who pulls his love away. As Arthur retreated, leaving Johnny alone again, the host picked up the largest piece of the broken pencil. He held the jagged wood, realizing his rage accomplished nothing but leaving him horribly alone. He realized that this fury, this preoccupation with external pressure, was precisely what the network wanted. They wanted him distracted, fighting shadows. He had to find a way back to the simple joy of the yellow number 2, back to the connection that mattered, away from the transactional world that sought to diminish him. He looked down at the broken wood, a silent promise forming in his heart that this moment of humiliation would never happen again. It was in the aftermath of the quiet, contained violence of the broken pencil that true healing began, not through a corporate apology or a reversal of ratings, but through the unassuming dignity of a small, anonymous gift. The true heart of Johnny Carson, the compassion beneath the celebrity, was about to be reached by a hand he had never met. The next morning, his assistant, managing the fallout, placed a plain brown package on his desk. It wasn't official mail. It was a package dropped off by a security guard near the audience entrance. Johnny ignored it for hours, wading through memos and grim reports. Finally, late that afternoon, he picked up the small box, curiosity outweighing his residual anger. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a pencil, not a mass-produced number 2. This was a pencil crafted by hand, made of rich, dark cedar, perfectly smooth, whittled to a gentle, precise point. It felt warm and personal, a stark contrast to the cold, splintered fragments nearby. Wrapped around the cedar pencil was a simple piece of notepaper, folded in half. Johnny opened the note, written in a slightly shaky script, clearly from an older hand. The words were few, yet held the weight of 1,000 network demands. The note simply read, "Dear Mr. Carson, thank you. My wife and I watch you every night. She's been struggling with her ailment, but your 10 minutes of jokes last night were the first time she smiled all week. It's a very small thing, but laughter is healing. The bad joke about Washington, the one that didn't land, made my wife smile because you looked like you were finally fighting for yourself. Keep sharpening your tools. A devoted viewer from Ohio." Johnny stared at those words. 10 minutes of jokes, not the ratings war, not the network bonus cut, not the rival host's share, just 10 minutes of forced, tired humor that cut through the pain of one family in Ohio. The word healing resonated, shaking the foundations of the cold rage he harbored. He hadn't been performing for the network. He had been serving a mission he hadn't known he had. He thought of the weeping actress, the flickering teleprompter, the shattered pencil, and realized he had been so consumed by the cost of the broadcast that he had forgotten its value. He put the note down and picked up the new pencil. He rolled the smooth cedar between his fingers. This was a gift of pure, unconditional gratitude, a direct line from the anonymous audience member to the man behind the desk, bypassing all the agents, producers, and corporate machinery. The small gift made him realize his job wasn't about control or numbers. It was about connection. It was about a man in Ohio who needed his wife to smile. In that quiet moment, the anger that had driven him to ruin his own tool finally dissolved, replaced by a profound, humbling realization. The only rating that truly mattered was the one in that heartfelt note. He knew what he had to do. Fight back against the network's coldness, not with anger, but with the one thing they couldn't control, his own integrity. The quiet wisdom contained in that simple cedar pencil and the note ignited a subtle, profound change in Johnny Carson, like the turning of a great ship in silent waters. He realized that the greatest weapon against his rivals and the indifferent network brass was not fury, but grace, and he was about to deploy it in a way no one expected. The first act of this new, quiet revolution was directed at the very pressures that had consumed him. He began his next monologue with the cedar pencil in his hand, a small, dark counterpoint to the dazzling stage lights. The writing was sharper, the timing effortless. He was back, but he was different. His energy wasn't about dominating, it was about sharing the space. Then came the moment of calculated kindness. His second guest that week was a struggling stand-up comedian. We call him Mickey, who had been booked for a rushed 5-minute set, a setup designed by the network to be filler. Mickey was exactly the kind of unpolished talent the slicker rival host would ignore or mock. But Johnny saw something authentic in the young comic's tape, a desperate need for a chance. Instead of rushing him, Johnny, using his full-time slot, gave Mickey 15 minutes. He listened intently, laughing not the polite chuckle, but a deep, genuine belly laugh that encouraged the comic and enveloped the audience in the joy of shared discovery. Johnny didn't just interview him, he elevated him. He made sure the lighting was perfect, the camera held steady. When Mickey finished his set, shaking with relief and gratitude, Johnny looked directly into the lens and said, with sincere conviction, "Mickey is going to be a star. Remember this night." The audience roared, a response not to a celebrity, but to an act of pure, powerful generosity. This was the quiet checkmate. The network wanted him to worry about his bonus and the ratings. Johnny's response was to use his immense platform to create the kind of moment that couldn't be bought, replicated, or overshadowed by cheap tricks. He showed the network that his true value lay in his ability to bestow legitimacy, a power they could never touch. He addressed the contract issue not with an angry meeting, but with a renewed, unassailable calm, signaling that their opinion was no longer the barometer of his worth. From that day forward, the cedar pencil became a permanent fixture on his desk, treated with quiet reverence. He would pick it up before every typing, remembering the simple thank you note and the couple in Ohio who only wanted a moment of healing laughter. The broken yellow pencil remained in the napkin in his drawer, a hidden reminder of the price of rage. He had learned that the most effective way to wield his fame was not to fight his enemies, but to build up those who needed a hand. His anger burned itself out, replaced by a quiet, determined integrity that made him untouchable. This story reminds us that true success is found in quiet integrity, not noisy competition. If this change in Johnny's heart inspires you, please share this story with a friend who needs a reminder that the greatest power we possess is the power to lift others. The night Johnny Carson broke his joke pencil became known, quietly, among the inner circle as the snap. This was a whispered legend among the crew, a silent code word, a shorthand for the sudden, furious realization that the most valuable things are often the most fragile, and true power lies in choosing what you protect. The cedar pencil became Johnny's most treasured desk accessory, representing the single perfect connection he made with his audience that surpassed all corporate concerns. He never spoke of the broken pencil publicly, but he adopted a ritual known only to his assistant. Before every taping, he would touch the smooth wood of the cedar pencil, a silent acknowledgement of the folks in Ohio, the real reason he walked onto that stage. The small, jagged fragments of the original yellow pencil, carefully contained in the paper napkin, remained in the deepest corner of his desk drawer for the rest of his career, a tangible reminder of the night he almost let the industry turn him into a bitter man. He started checking the West Coast feed status personally before every show, not out of fear, but out of a renewed, deeply ingrained concern for the distant viewer. He began to approach nervous, minor guests with paternal gentleness, having remembered the actress's tears and his own rage. He started seeing the person behind the performance. The profound irony of that sensational title, Johnny Carson broke his pencil in anger, is that the anger didn't destroy the taping. It saved the man. That three-sentence affront forced him to look past the glitz and remember the simple, quiet need for laughter in living rooms across America. He realized that the anger was a useless distraction, a corporate tool used to divert his attention from his real legacy. The true brilliance of the king of late night was not his ability to deliver a joke, but his capacity to make the audience feel seen, known, and included. The story of the broken pencil is ultimately not about an icon losing control. It is about a man choosing, in the quiet solitude of his rage, to let go of the things he couldn't control, the network, the rival, the ratings, and hold tight to the things that truly mattered, his integrity, his craft, and the individual human connection. He found a deeper, more permanent sense of purpose that night, transforming a moment of personal misery into a lifetime of quiet, powerful charity. He began a private foundation, known only to his closest attorney, dedicated to helping struggling artists and funding local community arts programs, ensuring the next generation of storytellers would always have a clear, sharp pencil to write their jokes, free from the crushing pressure of the suits. The pencil didn't just break, it broke the spell the industry had cast over him, allowing the kind, generous, and vulnerable man beneath the impeccable suit to emerge, ready to serve the audience who needed him. We are all searching for that one moment, that one event, that allows us to shed our anger and find our true purpose. Johnny Carson found him in a moment of fury, a broken piece of wood, and a heartfelt note from Ohio. That night, Johnny Carson proved that the man who makes us laugh is often the one who understands sorrow best. If this story of hidden strength and quiet redemption resonated with you, please subscribe for more untold moments that shaped Hollywood's greatest legends. And if you believe true power is found in integrity, hit the like button and share this lesson. Thanks for watching.